I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with John Leguizamo and Aram Rappaport. The forces behind the Green Veil, which is such a fascinating thing that I consider myself a very well, knowledgeable person. And Aram, I didn't know anything about this particular part of our history. Can you tell people what the kind of the factual basis of this show is?
Yeah, I mean, so the show is about native assimilation and native removal in the 1950s. And so this is something that's been going on. The show's about oppression. Let me start there and take a step back. It's about oppression just across the board in the 50s, which to me was fascinating. But I think one of the big storylines and what we sort of wove John's narrative around was this idea of oppressing and assimilating native families by kidnapping their kids and essentially pulling them and putting them up for adoption with white families. And so surprisingly enough, this is something, as I started getting into the research, was happening up until the 80s, the early 80s. Like 1979 is when it was, I think, officially, sort of ended, but there was sort of like a dribble, into the 80s of this thing. And that became sort of the basis for how we conquered the 50s in a different way that felt a little bit more unique, but still hit on like those oppressive moments that we all cling to in those types of stories.
Yeah, it's amazing because when Aaron presented it to me, I mean, obviously we all know about the Carlisle schools in the late 1800s and 1900s with Captain Pratt, who said to kill the Indian and save the man, horribleness. And we know about the American Holocaust, where 95% of Native American people were wiped out, and the great extermination that continued. But then to read about from Aram telling me that in the 1950s, they were taking Native American children, the U.S. government, from their homes and putting them for adoption to white families so they couldn't inherit the land so they could give it to oil companies, was so insidious to me and heartbreaking and shocking.
Well, and it was like so multifaceted. Like the plan wasn't an accident. I mean, this was years and years and years in the making to pull these kids and make them Christian, American Christians, make them whiter, sell off the land. Like there were so many elements of assimilation that we just don't think about. And to me, sort of like being in it and working with our tribal advisors, these are like deep-rooted traumas that are so evident at every step of the way. But as we've, premiered the show, it's this like epiphany for so many people. And I think that's the thing that's been like exciting, obviously, is being able to like bring a story like this to the masses. But also it's been super concerning that this is such a big piece of history that no one,
right.
I mean, the questions we get are like, how real is this? It couldn't be that real. It is still fiction, right? And when you get questions like that, it's, I mean, those are concerning. That's when it's time to open a history book.
Well, Tony, you're a teacher, right? You're a teacher. So like Carlos, not Carlos, George Santana, not to be confused with Carlos Santana, said, if we don't study history, we end up repeating it. And I know a lot of people don't want us to study history because their plan is to repeat it.
Well, and on top of that, you also have this layer, John, of your character, really trying to suppress his own identity in order to be a part of what he views as the American dream. And it creates, I mean, I know people have described this character as being very unsympathetic. I actually felt for this guy, which it was a weird feeling for me.
That is very weird, Tony.
No, it's not weird.
I mean, I am a likable human being.
Well, but I believe this character is more likable than John in real life, if we're being honest.
Only because I'm really, really harsh with you.
And with everybody.
For obvious reasons, because you need somebody to put you in your place to help you fit in America.
Yes, anyway. That's how you feel about it.
No,
your delusion.
This Gordo character, he's a fictional character, an amalgamation of facts that Aram found out. But you put it kindly, Tony, but he's really suffering what we know in our culture as, trying to pass, self-hating, in denial. And what's fascinating about Gordo and people like Gordo in our culture is that sometimes we people of color can be the worst to our own people. as we try to seek approval from the dominant culture. You know, these are like vestiges of colonialism and the conquest that continue in our culture, that continue proliferating colorism and Euro fascist beauty and the standards that we all still aspire. I mean, my mom is very light skinned. My aunt, her sister is very dark skinned, and obviously my mom they thought she was the prettier one, and my aunt wasn't. I mean, that's what goes on, and here we're finding this guy Gordo who is trying to pass. He marries the white wife. He can't have a white child, so he adopts one. So it's all he's passing and he's doing the right thing, and then he should be getting that American dream if he does it all right, and then you'll see in episode 8 that it doesn't all go that way.
Well, and there's that. It's so interesting you brought up the skin thing, because there's that great scene where he actually is putting skin bronzer on, and there's no words in that scene, but you see on this guy, on your face, everything that this guy is feeling. It's such a great performance. I mean, that scene especially.
When I took this to John, I know John's going to talk about himself, so let me talk about John for a sec. I
like when you talk about me, Aram.
I know. So stop interrupting.
Oh, please do.
I have to
I feel like
qualify.
I'm in couples therapy. What's happening here?
If I talk about myself, he interrupts, so I have to qualify it and say, John, I'm about to talk about you, so be very quiet and listen. So John and I were doing Latin History for Morons together. He graciously brought me in to direct the Netflix version of it. And he would do 300 shows before he would even bring these things to Broadway and test these. And so this was like, I'd known him since previous shows, but it was so historical, and he's reading history books and he's trying to marry that to comedy. I, at that moment, was like, I have to find something for him that he's never been allowed to play or never been given the opportunity to do that's as multifaceted as I see this guy from behind the scenes, right? Because he's on Broadway for 90 minutes. It's very funny. There's a lot of history there. But what he was going through in the rigorous history behind this thing, and like him trying to figure out his identity, and crafting this script, he got brilliant reviews in the New York Times. And that night he's rewriting, trying to make it better and better. And I'm thinking, like, how do we work together in a way that pulls out that excellence and makes me better as a creator, as a director and a writer, and gives him something as a platform to play. And I feel like, had we not had this 15-year relationship, there's no way there would have been trust on either side to play such a risky Latin character who's self-hating. And there's so many, like you said, you want to like him or feel sorry for him, but you can't, but you're so conflicted. And that was something that only John could have done, I felt.
Well, dude, your words are making my head spin.
Why are you spinning then?
Because it made me spin. No, thank you for the kind words. And Aram is right. I mean, because of our relationship and our close relationship and our creative relationship, I felt the confidence to bring this character to life, because it's not an easy character. He's very despicable, and you have to live with a lot of horrible feelings within yourself. And also to capture the nuance and the reality, and you don't have to like my character, the lead, but we wanted you to understand how people like this are forged, how they're created, how horrible incidents can make somebody either turn great or turn horrible. And then some people just become destroyers instead of creators. Jose Marti, one of the great Cuban poets and revolutionaries, said the world creates two types of men: men who create or men who destroy. And Gordo is one of those that destroyed, like Trump. Trump is a destroyer and Biden's a creator. There's two types of men in the world.
Well, and to that end, but I also think what's great about this character is that you don't like him, but you see how he got here.
Yeah,
and it makes him more human rather than just a bad guy. Was that really important as you guys are crafting this? Were you looking for those shades of gray in him?
Tony, that's a great question and a great observation, because it's very important to me and Aram that
don't bring me in on it. Don't.
Okay, to me, that we create a real person. I'm not for, you know, all thing when things are just black and white. I like shades of gray because that's how reality is. You don't see villains. They never appear as villainous. They're always the most charming and charismatic people. So yeah, life is in the gray zone. So we wanted to create as much reality as possible.
And I feel like we couldn't have done it if we didn't have a cadence and a working relationship to take risks on set, because I don't think it was always evident how we were going to get to that gray zone on set. It came together in the edit. And so for John to be able to, we're shooting 20 or 25 pages a day. And for
which
John
is massive, which is a massive undertaking. I've done over 150 films, not all great, but some of them are. But I've never done 20 pages a day. It's a massive undertaking, and to sculpt these scenes and to make them so subtle and real was a masterclass in directing and writing and hopefully acting.
One of the things that I love is that there's a disclaimer at the beginning of every episode that this is not related to a specific tribe. What was the genesis of that idea? Because it still have that authenticity.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, look, I think like my journey through this has been trying to figure out how to be the best ally and offer something new to stories that interest me, that I can honor, but that aren't necessarily mine or ownable 100%. Like, I think there's pieces of this that I feel really connected to because of my background, my history on the oppression side of things. And there's a reason why I was like drawn to the 50s. The Native storyline is obviously something that I needed and we needed to be really careful about. And so we brought in multiple Native advisors. One of them was Irene Bedard, who also executive produced and was in the show.
Oh, it was amazing in the show. She's
amazing
incredible. Amazing.
Unbelievable. So raw, so personal.
Yeah.
And it really felt like she was.
And powerful, so powerful.
It felt like therapy being there with her, watching her work through these moments. And then the other one is Melissa Tantaquidgeon, who was a part of the Mohegan tribe, which is factually where we set some of the show. And so it was actually her idea. She said, look, like, she had said to me very early on, like, there's not a lot of historical fiction for Native actors or Native writers or Native directors or producers. There's a lot of, people think that Native actors have to be in a historical piece and it has to be so true to, and that's all they can do. There's not a lot of opportunity to stray from that. And she said, couldn't be further from the truth. We're storytellers. She said that anything she's a writer as well. She would talk about how she writes fiction and draws on stories from her culture. And so she had said, I think it's really important for us to say that this is not based on a single tribe, but this has happened. We went back and forth on that for months on like how much to put in, how much not, whatever. But now watching the show again, it almost like gives it more gravitas somehow, because you're thinking the whole time, well, wait a second. How careful were they? Like, what is real about this? And I do like that leading up to episode 8, where we have Beth, who is one of the Mohegan elders, and that is a real interview with her in that episode. And that, it sort of like opens the door for us to be a little bit more truthful at the end of the show. And I also think it helps us honor the tribes, because we did take liberties. Like, it's still a show. Like, we had to take liberties. We didn't shoot things in the right spot.
Right. It's still historical fiction, but now you have a testimony.
Exactly.
And Aram, before I did this, the show, he gave me this documentary on a lot of these survivors of this adoption program. And you found out that, there was many suicides, cases of addiction, just broken spirits from this program, this horrific program.
And these are young people now, still in their 40s, 50s. I mean, people working through this generational trauma, because this has happened across the US, Canada. I mean, it's happened everywhere. Well,
John, from an acting perspective, you mentioned it earlier, you have to go to some very dark places. And I think one of the best scenes in the whole thing is the scene after kind of the wife and the daughter leave you and you're alone, and you're kind of figuring out how to put this all together. It's very much like the breaking of the hand, which still makes me cringe every single time. But but that had to be a very intense day of shooting that particular scene.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, how do you yeah, how do you hurt yourself without hurting yourself? That's like, always
Physically,
so tricky.
physically and emotionally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a lot of actors do hurt themselves emotionally. I was talking with my wife the other day. Just sometimes it feels a little masochistic, the work. I mean, a lot of times it does really take out all this trauma you grew up with, and obviously the more trauma you grew up with, the better actor you can be. But at the same time, you have to, you know, take the scab off these wounds. But then the wounds are open, and what do you do with that? How much therapy can you do to put yourself back together? It's always a tricky place to go to, and I'm definitely trying to be safer with myself and kinder to myself than when I was younger, and try to go to these places without really damaging myself emotionally and physically.
I'm curious as to, now that because you both have said this is like a place where John hasn't really been able to really dig in like this. Has playing this role, John, made you like feel more confident that you can do
Yes,
roles like this?
absolutely, absolutely.
I don't think I'm gonna push back. I don't think that's true. We knew he could do it. He can do it. But this is one of those things. This is one of those things where like
I'm not fake humble. You try to say I'm fake humble?
you are fake.
No.
You're not fake.
Aaron, no, it is true. I know I can act. I mean, I've been
No,
acting since I was
I know.
17. But to feel empowered that I can carry an 8-part series as a
Right.
leading man,
Right.
that was what emboldened me. That's what boosted me. That's what gave me the confidence to pursue for more, because these opportunities of getting great leading roles as a Latin man are 0 to 0.
Right, and that's the question, right? It's like, why not? Like, why is this the first time? Because you're so multifaceted. You've played every type of character there is to play. Like, you can't, 150 plus movies. I mean, 30 of those were animals, I'm sure, or some sort of, spawn type creature.
I did the sloth.
I mean, you've been all over that, but
Spawn.
that was the question. That's what, when we were doing Latin History for Mormons, that's what emboldened me to think, well, wait a second, maybe is there a bet? I had talked to John very early on. I was like, I'm not the guy to direct this. You want someone else. And he said, no, you're a good ally and you understand this and you've been with me on the journey, and let me teach you how to be an ally. And that stuck with me. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, how do I help him here? Like, what can I do to elevate this guy that's been here for, John's 92 now. So I think it's been like 75 years.
But I look great because brown don't break down.
That's right. But this was
so
one of the
I am
things.
90. But I mean, Aram is such a beautiful example of allyship and how important allyship is to us people of color, especially Latinos, in this juncture where we're still incredibly excluded in Hollywood. Hollywood, a place that was built on like 60 years after it had just been Mexico. So Hollywood was built around Latin people everywhere. It's 50% of the population here. And it was a whites only game, Hollywood, until very recently, and it still continues. We're still the most excluded group in Hollywood and streaming. Yet we're 20% of the US population, with almost 24% to 30% of the US box office, 30% of subscribers for streaming, a third of sports fans. We just last year contributed $3.2 trillion to the US GDP. And yet we're less than 6% of the leads, less than 1% of the executives, less than 1% of the stories being told. That's unacceptable. That's still systemic racism at its strongest.
Is that one of the reasons why you guys basically created, your own outlet to put this out there?
Yeah, well, I think it's twofold. I think one, look, like the streamers are afraid to tell stories in a way that doesn't mitigate their, fallout on the executive path to whatever the next, these execs that sit in a room and make decisions, they were never going to greenlight this. We would go and talk to them. You know, one of the questions we got was, well, if this is a Latin thing, why isn't it in Spanish? Well, if this is a native thing, why is John playing a multifaceted character who's trying to pass as white? Like, people just didn't understand what this was. So that was number one. And then number two is, I think we realized that there is a space for a platform that can be premium and free, that can push the envelope on what premium content is. It doesn't mean it's the biggest budget that has the most executives making notes on it. It means that it's prolific, forward-thinking, and moving content that can be gritty, like a throwback, 90s HBO, and still be hooky and still feel four quadrant. I think we were out to prove that, because a lot of the feedback we got is, well, people aren't going to understand this. Nobody wants the story. People don't want to, they want to see murder, but they don't want to see native kidnapping. They want to see this, but they don't want to see that. And these are all white execs that felt like if they greenlit this, maybe it would be interesting, but only if they kept their job. Only if they still had a job after the show came out. And it's right. That.
I mean, Hollywood, sorry to interrupt. Hollywood has always been a fear.
Thank you for interrupting.
You're welcome. I interrupt to help out.
No.
Yeah, no, it is. Hollywood has always been a fear-based industry. Executives are always afraid of losing their gigs and their jobs. So that every decision is based on fear of losing the job, a failure. So it's hard. I mean, look, we pitched it everywhere. Nobody would pick it up, but they offered Aram tons of directing gigs because they loved the show. They just couldn't put it on their platforms. I mean, when I was younger and executives didn't really care about what they said, they would tell me the craziest things. When I would pitch them Latin stories, they would tell me, well, Latin people don't want to see Latin people. They want to see white people. And I would go, wait, what? That was Hollywood wisdom, and they would tell me, pitch them like a feel-good movie. Latin people don't want to see feel-good movies. Executives would tell me, we don't have to go after Latino audiences. We already got them. So, I mean, they would never say it to me in these days because it's a different world, but things haven't really changed. They're still not greenlighting Latin content. I mean, there's all this talk of inclusivity and diversity. Where is it? Where is it?
Yeah, I feel like one of those, like Gordon would be one of those people would be one of those Latinos that would say, no, I don't want to see that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, I mean, you look at the border. I watch Fox News to see what the enemy's doing, and when all they talk about is the border, and guess who is all the border patrol? Latin people, letting women drown and babies drown in the rivers, grabbing them, snatching them. It's Latin people. Who was the head of the Proud Boys? Enrique Terrio, an Afro-Latino, Cuban Afro-Latino, was the lead of a white nationalist group. Who is the most disgusting, despicable white nationalist? Nick Fuentes, Mexican-American, who is so self-hating and homophobic, anti-Semitic. I mean, these people exist, and that's who we want to call out. That's who we want to eviscerate.
And I think you did it beautifully. John, Aram, thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming weeks. Thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it.
And you can get it at the network.stream. It's free. And if you're like me, you love everything free. It's the network.stream. No credit cards needed. You just have to put up a little advertising because that's how we pay for things. The network.stream. Thank you, Tony. What a pleasure. Thank
you, Tony.
Thank you.